Hey folks, I'm Chase Clemons. I'm running to be your next state senator for District 14. So if you're in Bedford, Lincoln, Marshall, Moore, or the eastern half of Rutherford County, I was on your primary ballot. Now that I've got the nomination, I'll be on your November ballot coming up shortly. With me today is Matt Ferry. He's running House District 48. Matt, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. Enjoying this beautiful day before it rains again.
Right? It's so strange today. It's been storms and then like sunshine right after.
Yeah, I did some watering in the garden the other day, and then it all came down, and I was like, "This is perfect metaphor for 2020, I
Yeah,
guess."
this is 2020 as we are right now. And it's one of those where, I mean, not to be too on the nose with a segue here, but it's one of those where way back when the pandemic started, we were promised the storm would pass.
Right.
And it's been day after day that we've seen the COVID case counts go up. We've seen funding for all of our communities go down. And that's not even talking about the budget cuts we're going to look at for like next year when we don't get state and local funding. So we have to start thinking about what services you cut when it comes to schools and fires and police and things. But today, you and I were talking earlier, we just want to chat for a minute about the special session that
Yes.
the governor called. So for folks that don't know what's going on with the special session, or maybe didn't know it was happening, can you kind of fill folks in?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the second special session this year. In March, when the pandemic crisis was really hitting hard, they shut down state government. They said for a month, and then they said for a little bit longer. They came back in June, and I forgot everything that they passed, but I think one was like a permitless carry bill. Anyway, going on to August, they still aren't doing the right thing, right? They're still not taking this pandemic seriously. So, I mean, my big question is, why are we even having this special session? Like you were saying, how much did you say? $47,000 a day, something like that.
$47,000 a day is being spent. The governor called everybody back in for maybe 3 days if everything gets wrapped up.
Right. And the only things on the agenda are extending telehealth options, which sounds very nice, except really doesn't do much of anything to help people's access to healthcare. Or what did you say about it? You said it's extending an executive order, right?
Yeah, so the telehealth thing is really interesting because for rural counties like ours, telehealth is one of those things where when you've got the broadband access, when you have internet access, when you have the devices you need, an iPhone, an Android phone, or a laptop, like when you have all these things that can lead into telehealth, it's really great because, if you have a minor thing that you're like a prescription refill, you can do a telehealth session with your doctor and get that prescription refilled without having to drive over to see them and take time out of your day. Like, it all sounds great when you have the support around it that you need. The thing
Right.
with what they're discussing right now is basically they're writing into law what the executive order from Governor Lee already does. If you want to tackle this without spending $47,000 a day, you just have Governor Lee extend his current executive order to cover it. It's a stroke of a pen, takes him 5 minutes at most if he writes his name really, really slow, and doesn't cost us $47,000 a day for that. That's telehealth is something that our rural communities can really benefit from. The problem with how Republicans in the supermajority are going about it right now is, one, the price tag, and two, it's just not needed during a pandemic to go about it this way. It's literally something that can be done with a stroke of a pen, and we can get back to the people's business.
Right. No, that's a really good point. I think that, again, this is something that they always try to act like they're doing something, right? Like with the president's like new executive order bill, it's acting like it's doing something. It's really not doing anything. The As far as like healthcare goes, with this telehealth bill, it does sound nice, but it's not necessarily. You're right. It's just part of a system, and if you don't have those other pieces in place, it's really not going to contribute to the rural healthcare in Tennessee. So that's just the first thing on the agenda, and they still haven't agreed on those things. Good job. The second thing on the agenda is the protesters. They're going to go after the protesters. There's been protesters at the mall for 58 days straight. I think it is now.
Yeah.
And, they want the bust of Nathan Bedford Forrest down. They want to, some other things. They want to sit down with Governor Lee, and that hasn't happened. But, at the end of the day, there's already laws like this. And the laws that they are pursuing are not constitutionally sound. So they will be challenged in court. There will be lawsuits. And like Tennessee Holler says, our legislation doesn't pass laws, they pass lawsuits. And so we're going to get ourselves into another lawsuit. But the other thing, the thing that we want to talk about, I think, more than any of the other things on the agenda is about the extending immunity, liability coverage for businesses. It's supposed to be school districts also and other entities, organizations. As Gloria Johnson had pointed out, most of these entities already have liability coverage, but the businesses that are targeted in this bill are 0.001% of the businesses in Tennessee. They are the very rich. They are the people who probably want to rush all their workers back into work and don't want to pay for the consequences when their workers get sick. So, I mean, we've had some experience with Tennessee, and their workplace laws here are not the greatest. And so they want to slash worker safety, of course, again and again and again. Here's my biggest takeaway. And I'm sorry, I'll let you talk after this. My biggest takeaway is this. They want to act like the pandemic is not a big deal. They want to act like this coronavirus thing is not a big deal. At the same time, they also want to make sure that their butts are covered. They want to make sure that their friends' butts are covered, So which is it exactly? Is it real or is it not? And I mean, added on to that, I think it is a mistake to rush kids into school without really thinking this out and really increasing funding for those things. So I touched on about 100 different things right there, but please share your thoughts about this.
Here's the thing. Whenever you hear a phrase like COVID, liability, the thing that you should instantly think first is what business is trying to cover its interests.
Right.
That's when we talk about liability laws, that's what's going on there. It's that somebody with money is doing something that might get them in trouble. So they want to make sure the law's on their side.
Right.
And that's what's happening here. You've got big businesses and millionaires that are stepping in and saying, hey, GOP, before I write you a check for this fall, before I write you a donation check for your upcoming election in November, I need you to do something for me. I need you to make sure that if my employees get sick because I'm not providing a safe work environment, or because I'm opening before I should be, or because of any number of reasons where I'm not following guidelines that I should be following, I need you to protect me from those when that happens, from the lawsuits that would happen in that case. Look, end of the day, what's happening is big businesses, millionaires and billionaires and that kind of thing, are looking at everyone else and going, I need laws and rules that apply to me, but that don't apply to you. And I'm sorry, again, this is not the people's business. When you're calling the general session, when you're calling the legislature back in for a session at $47,000 a day, you should be focused on the people's business, and especially the pandemic business during the middle of a pandemic. That's the thing that's just so infuriating with all these, because all three of the things that that they're looking at, telehealth, protesting laws, the COVID liability, the price tag is out the wazoo here. This is taxpayer money that's being spent when it doesn't have to be.
Right.
The legality of it is questionable in all this, and considering the laws they passed earlier, the GOP majority is just not. They're just not doing well on the legality point.
Right.
And at the end of the day, again, this is just not the people's business that needs to be done right now.
Right.
So like you and I were talking earlier, if you had a Democratic majority in there right now, um, what do you think we would be seeing out of a special session during the middle of a pandemic, during one of the worst economic recessions at the very least that we've seen in a while? What do you think our Democratic leadership would be pushing for if we had that majority?
The number one thing would be expanding Medicaid.
Yeah,
absolutely. This is something we've been fighting for years. There's even some Republicans who are on board for this. This is federal money that is now going to other states that could be coming to Tennessee. We've lost billions of dollars at this point in federal funds because of this. Republicans have argued that we can't afford it. We can't afford it. Well, 90% of it is going to be paid by the federal government, and the other 10% is going to be paid by the Tennessee Hospital Association. They already agreed to that. So there's no added cost to taxpayers. And then they say stuff like, we can't trust the federal government. Forget the fact that, they have, 2/3 of it, if not more. Why don't they trust them? And, a point that someone else made was, Tennessee gets all kinds of federal funding for parks and for roads and for all kinds of stuff, and they don't have any problem taking that money. But for healthcare, all of a sudden there's a big problem with it. And in the meantime, we've almost more than a dozen rural hospitals have closed, and the state has provided some money to try to prop that up. But that's why are they even doing that when they could accept Medicaid? So it's really shameful, because thousands of Tennesseans could be affected by it. I mean, we know there are thousands of Tennesseans who are uninsured, underinsured, and especially during a pandemic, this would be a much needed program to implement.
Yeah. Think about how quickly that shifts, right? It goes from we're spending $47,000 a day to protect big businesses, to we're going to expand Medicaid and bring in $3.8 million a day.
Right.
Like, it instantly changes should we have a special session during a pandemic? If the answer is we're going to get $3.8 million a day out of it, then yes, of course you do, because that's what we need right now.
Right.
Across our district, we're seeing hundreds and hundreds of new cases. We're seeing, doctors that really aren't set up to handle COVID now sending patients over to hospitals, and now these rural hospitals are going, well, if we're seeing this influx, we need money.
Yep.
There's $1.3 billion sitting out there, $3.8 million a day, all that money already paid for, ready to go, that can be brought back into our state right away and start providing funding, real funding, not this like chump change little stuff that the governor is putting out, but like real funding, sustained funding that will keep our rural hospitals up and running when we need them the most. I mean, if Democrats were in the majority and we called a special session right now, that's absolutely number one on the list, what we would be doing.
Yeah. Well, I think another thing is, and you touched on this earlier, is fully fund our schools. It's been underfunded. Our public education system has been underfunded for years. And, recently, I know in the budget they were supposed to pass in March, it had some teacher raises in it. They cut that, but now they want to rush teachers back to school, but with no added pay and no added money for supplies, maybe to combat the virus in the schools. That might help. I mean, there's so much that we could do in regards to public education to actually make sure that kids go to school safely, and they're not doing any of that.
Yeah. Have you seen where this started popping up more and more on my Facebook page, streams and things like that, is, there's these groups starting that basically are like Amazon wish lists for teachers. So you'll have a group of like folks, of teachers in Lincoln County or in Bedford County or in Rutherford County that put together an Amazon wish list, put it in a Facebook group, and then people will buy those, almost like a wedding registry or a new baby list or something like that. One of the biggest talking points we always hear from Republicans is that schools are fully funded. I call BS when we have groups like that are having to resort to Amazon wish lists to get the basic stuff they need, to get sanitizer, to get Clorox wipes, to get crayons and napkins and everything. Like, we're not giving them enough funding. And That's
Right.
before the pandemic hit. So not only are we asking more of our teachers, we're not even asking, we're demanding that they do more and not
Right.
paying them enough and not funding them enough, not funding their classrooms enough. I mean, you think about, so I've talked to teachers here in the district where they're planning a in-person class, a school plan, they're doing a virtual plan. They're looking a week down the road going, all right, well, what happens if we have to go to a hybrid model or if we have to go all virtual? Like, how's that going to change my lesson plans? Like, they're
Right.
having to do all this extra work. We're asking them to step up in so many ways now and saying, hey, you've got to do all this. You're now a frontline critical infrastructure employee, but we're not going to give you the raises we promised earlier. And in fact, depending on how this budget plays out, we might have to fire a lot of you or cut your salaries next year. Like, we've talked before about how budgets show priorities. If you say that you're trying to get healthy and I look at your budget and you're spending $100 a week at McDonald's, that tells me you're not trying to get healthy. It's the same thing with the Republican budget they passed earlier in the year, the same thing that they're doing right now. They don't care about equipping our teachers and making sure that they have what they need. Teachers deserve better than they're getting, and they're just not getting it. So yeah, that 100%. Expanding Medicaid would have been top of the list for a Democratic majority special session. Really giving money to our schools and our teachers would have been the second. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like we were saying earlier with the liability, they're going to cover businesses. They're going to cover some school districts. That doesn't mean that they're going to cover workers or teachers who are being rushed back in. And some of these essential workers, they're not paid anything. They don't have any benefits. They're not getting paid hazard pay. If they get sick, there's no paid sick leave. And I know that that's a big concern up in Nashville now because the construction sites there are pretty unregulated, or there's a lot of loose rules happening. And of course, there's been a COVID outbreak in some of them. So that's a lot. It's a lot going on, but there's so much that the legislature could be doing. There's so much that the governor could be doing. But from the very beginning of this pandemic, they have downplayed it. They've downplayed the threat. They've downplayed the danger. They've tried to act like it's no big deal. Bill Lee, back in April, like you said the storm is passing. Well, the storm is still here. It's still with us. And by the way, the state legislature still maintains $1 billion rainy day fund. And we're not certain when that's supposed to be in use because it's technically pouring right now. And this special session is probably going to be the last time they're going to meet before the end of the year, before the election, which is less than 3 months away. And so they won't be able to meet again until January. What's going to happen in these next 4 months? It's not going away. And I think that they'd have to call another special session. I don't know how you would do that right before or right after the election, but our leaders have not done enough. And it's really, really sad. I mean, I hate to put it in these terms, but how many people have to die before they actually take this seriously? I don't know. But what else do you think Democrats would do in a state if they were in charge of this special session instead of Republicans?
Yeah, let's match them 3 for 3. So the other big thing would be, let's fix the unemployment system that we have in the state right now. Because if you've tried to get unemployment benefits in the last 6 months, it's a nightmare. Right. We've heard from people trying to apply for those benefits that it's a nightmare. We've heard from people that are working in the system that it's a nightmare. Mm-hmm. And nothing is getting better there.
Right.
And when you look at how the federal funding comes through for unemployment, it has to flow through the unemployment system. So you look at, some of the ideas the Republicans at the national level have been throwing out, maybe $300 a week if the state can match $100 of that. Well, our system's not set up that way. Our state unemployment system is not set up to handle that kind of payout structure. And what the funniest, depressing, sad, whatever you want to call it, the state was trying to hire on computer programmers to work with the unemployment system that was written in a code from decades ago, right?
I remember that now. Yeah.
Decades ago. So that's got to be top of the list too. Like if we're going 3 for 3, if we're matching their 3 bad, well, telehealth is a decent idea, but could have been otherwise. But if we're matching their 3 for our 3, then yeah, fix the unemployment system, because we're not out of the storm yet. We're going to have to keep that going. And the quicker we can get people their unemployment benefits that they paid into and that they deserve,
Right.
the better our economy is going to be and the better off our families are going to be.
Right. That's absolutely true. And they had the chance back in March to actually fully fund the unemployment system, which has been historically underfunded for years. And, not just provide the funds for the actual unemployment money, the unemployment compensation fund, but money for staffing. Because like you said, there was, 10 weeks delays for some folks. I think some folks are still waiting on some of those bigger checks. If you were a full-time worker and you lost your job in Tennessee and you were trying to pull unemployment, you might have gotten some of that federal money, but not from the state. So that's a big, 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 big problem. And again, our legislators are absent, or they're not taking this seriously. They're downplaying it. And, well, they could just get a job somewhere else. Well, great. This guy who, has years of experience working in this job, who could easily get another job if we actually took this seriously. But instead you want him to go and work at Sonic now or whatever, it's shameful, because it really is. This is going to hurt workers more than anything else, and especially our healthcare workers. Our healthcare workers on the front lines of this, they're not being paid enough from the get-go, and we're not providing enough PPE, personal protection equipment, for them to wear. So, there could be an increase of funding for that, or I don't know, maybe contact tracing and testing, something that we desperately, desperately need to expand in Tennessee. I think I read something today that said that we have hit the 5 million mark in America, in the United States. We have over 5 million coronavirus cases now at this point. And they think that the number is really 10 times that. But we don't know, because our testing and tracing across the board, has not been desirable. We know there's lots of problems with it. I know some people personally who swear they've had COVID, but the test they get 2 or 3 weeks later, it says negative. So it's none of that is going to help contain the virus, and we're going to go into the fall and winter like this. It's kind of a scary time. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so all of this is intertwined in the fact that our current Republican leadership is not looking further than, I'll be generous and say, the election, right? Arguably not much farther past this month, but definitely not any further than the election right now. Mm-hmm. And because of that short-sightedness, yeah, maybe you get through the press cycle, maybe you get to play local games for another little while, and kind of keep your seat cushy and everything else. Mm-hmm. The thing is, while they're doing that, while they're just trying to get through the press cycle and trying to get through the political game, we've got families out here that are looking at our state leadership and going, why aren't you helping?
Right.
Why aren't you doing anything about this? Why aren't you doing the right things to make sure that our schools are safe, that our workplaces are safe, that our economy can actually sustain itself and not crash any further deeper than the recession that we're in right now? That's that lack of leadership is so infuriating, because here's the thing. When you look at the politics of all this, if the Republican majority would just do the right thing, and they can do that because they have a supermajority. They can pass whatever bills they want. They can pass whatever laws and funding and everything else they want. If they would just do the right thing and fund our schools and pay our teachers and expand Medicaid here and fix the unemployment system and work on that contact and trade, if they would just do those right things, then they would win elections in a landslide like we've never seen before, right? So it's in their political best interest to do these things, but they won't. And so you have to ask the question, well, why? Why are they not showing real leadership? Why are they not actually looking out for your family and my family and every other friend, neighbor, and family member I've got here in our community? And the answer is pretty simple. It's because they like their funding from big businesses and millionaires. Mm-hmm. Why are they doing COVID liabilities? Because they want the checks from those big PACs and those big companies and those millionaires and billionaires. They want that money so that they can stay exactly where they are and make sure that they keep carving the economy up and keep carving our state up for themselves. That's it.
Right. I remember I was talking to someone recently about, how conservatives like to call themselves very fiscally conservative. Their main point is, we've got so much fat in the budget. We need to cut this and cut that. And so, they get elected, they go in, they cut funding for public schools. They've cut funding for state universities over the decades. And that's helped rising tuition. They, cut money for all kinds of social services, community services, all that kind of stuff. But here's the thing is that Republicans like to spend money too. They're spending money on their own pet projects. They're not this fiscally conservative. It's a myth. It really is. They say they care about deficits. They really don't. Really, they don't want to spend money on the people. They want to spend money on, like you said, their big business friends. I mean, just think about the millions, if not billions of dollars in tax incentives we've given Amazon and FedEx and other companies here in Tennessee. Why did they need that money exactly? These are billion-dollar companies that can afford to pay taxes in Tennessee. But, we already don't have a state income tax. And, you talk about that with some people and they start, foaming at the mouth. But, a state income tax would do a lot of good in this state. And it wouldn't be an incredible amount of money that people will be paying. In fact, the sales tax could possibly come down if we did have a state income tax. Anyway, I'm kind of going all over the place there. But there is so much that they could be doing, and they're not interested in any of that. Frankly, they despise the middle class, I think. I think they want to take it back to a place where there was only two kinds of people, the very rich and the very poor. And so I think, and if you just look at the system is designed to keep certain people down. And, mostly those people are, black and brown people, but they're also white. But they usually don't have the means to fight back. So, this is another reason why we're running right here is that in the midst of a pandemic, there's so many things that our state legislature could be doing. Of course, there's so many things the federal government could be doing, but we know that they have already passed on doing that. I don't know if you read that report that said that Jared Kushner, who was on the coronavirus task force, had a 50-state plan. And when they realized that it was going to possibly hurt blue states more than red states, they chucked it. So, they're honestly playing with people's lives. And it's absolutely disgusting. And it's very frustrating when you try to describe this to someone who doesn't think it's happening or doesn't think that this is a real serious thing. But unfortunately, it might get worse before it gets better. That was not very optimistic, I know. But we can have this change, and we can start in November by electing people like Chase Clemons for Senate, who would make a damn better senator than the bum we have in right now, Shane Reeves. I'm sorry, I'm going to talk negative about him, but a guy who has spent his life in healthcare, could care less about actually providing healthcare for the people in his district. It's absolutely disgusting to me. And of course I could talk about my opponent about that too. But, none of these legislators have the people's well-being in mind. And this special session is another proof of that. So, I actually think that this special session might last longer than 3 days because they don't seem to be in agreement about anything. But I'm not anticipating any worthwhile meaningful legislation that will actually help the people. So
$47,000 a day.
What'd you say?
$47,000 a day. That number still just blows my mind. So let's talk at the end here about how it does get better, because our families and our communities absolutely deserve better leadership. They deserve better representation. I'd say that you in House District 48, myself over here in Senate District 14 are better than the folks that are in there currently. So yeah, I think, so it starts, we talk about it always, your vote being your voice, that that change starts at the ballot box. We're a little less than 90 days now out from the November election. So if you're watching this, if you're listening to our conversation and you're saying, hey, I agree with Matt, I agree with Chase, I deserve better, our community deserves better, what do we do now? I'm going to say first, organize, right?
Yes.
Go through, easy thing here, right? Go through every contact that you have in your phone, whether it's in your address book or on Facebook or on Twitter or whatnot. Go through and make you a list of all of them, and go through that list and talk to every single one of them and make sure they're registered to vote. Make sure that they're taking the time now to get their voter registration right, because you can't vote unless you're registered. And just the simple fact of you right now that are listening to Matt and myself, if you go through and make your list and talk to every single person on there and make sure they're registered to vote, that's already heads and tails above what we have right now. That's already so much more organized than what we have right now. So that's one thing you can do right now to start working toward that better place, to start working toward making Tennessee actually work for everyone instead of just the wealthy and the well-connected. So that's my one piece of like, just do this right now. Go through your contact list, make send a text to everyone or phone, give them a call or write a letter, whatever you have to do. Make sure that everyone is registered to vote, because that's the big thing right now. Matt, for those watching, one thing, what would you say?
Well, I loved what you just said. You're absolutely right. That's what we need to do. We do need to organize any way we can. We know that some people are very limited in what they can do, but that's something that they can do. They can go down their contact list. They can text people that might vote for us. Hey, have you checked out your voter registration in a while? Go to govotetn.com or .org. They both work. And you can check out your voter registration. You can see who represents you, and you can register to vote if you're not already registered to vote. So it's so easy to do that. Luckily, that is a very useful tool that the Secretary of State has provided. There's so much more that they could do. We know that voter suppression is very real in Tennessee, but on top of that, there's so many people who just don't vote, and I think for a lot of them, they don't think that their vote matters. But I'll say two things to that. Not only does your vote matter, not only does politics affect everything in your life, but we have a chance to change things here in Tennessee. We really do. It's not a fantasy. And so, speak to your neighbor, speak to your friends, speak to your family members, and, tell them, hey, sometimes you got to connect the dots for them. Hey, look, tuition is up because they've cut state funding, or, this pandemic response has failed because our leaders have not taken this seriously. And if you kind of connect the dots for people and they can understand how little that their elected leadership is doing for them, that is another person that might not only vote for, the candidate, they might spread the word. And it's not just about 2020, even though it's very important this year. 22 is right around the corner. All these seats are going to be up again. Your seat is not going to be up again in 22, but most of the seats that are up this year are going to be up next year. It happens every 2 years. I've been telling people, we've got Rutherford County Commission seats. All 21 of them are up next time around. We've got, half of the school board, half of the county school board, half of the city school board, half of the city council. I had a lot of people contact me recently and said, can we please replace our county school board this year? And I said, actually, not this year, but, hopefully this encourages people. The county school board response to this pandemic has been terrible. Our city school board is way better. But I'm hoping that this encourages people to come out and fight and get these seats and fight for other people to get them. Like I said, 2020 this year, it's so important. And I think a lot of people are going to come out and vote, but we need so many more. And 22 is right around the corner. So I believe you said, do you have one thing left? And I believe I just said about 10 or 12. And I'm so sorry. I'm just in ranting mode today. But Chase, I appreciate you having me on today. Thank you for talking to me. I appreciate you stepping up and running in Senate 14. It's an important thing to run for these seats, and I really appreciate you running. So I think you're giving it a great shot. And man, I would love for you to be my senator. Absolutely. So you definitely got my vote, and your sign is in my yard. So please go out and support Chase Clemons for Senate 14.
Yeah, so if you're looking to volunteer for our campaign, chasefortn.com, that's the website you want to hit up. If you're watching this on Facebook right now, you can just click on my Facebook page at chasefortn. You'll see us there. Bedford, Lincoln, Marshall, Moore, and the eastern half of Rutherford County. So if you're in any of those places, that's where you're in our district. Like Matt mentioned earlier, govotn.com. If you're just you think you might be in the 14th or you think you might be in the 48th, but you're not entirely for sure, check out the website. That's going to help you there. Last plug I'll make, if you're in eastern Rutherford County, basically just east of MTSU campus, going all the way to the county line, Matt is your guy that you want for the House district. So mattferrytn48.com, volunteer, donate, help organize, help make calls and send texts and write postcards and all those other things. That's what it's going to take this time around, because a lot of us are not, we're not going to outspend the Republican side, but we're definitely going to outwork and out-organize them. That's the name of the game this time around.
That's right. That's right. It is a grassroots campaign that we are running, but we're going to give it the best shot we can. And we got the opportunity. We really do. But we do need some people to step up and help us. So thank you for the plug, Chase. And thank you again for having me on here. It was a good conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Thanks all of you for watching. Like we said, go ahead and share this video around. If you haven't yet, hit up the websites. Other than that, we'll see you again next time. Y'all stay safe.